With any other person, a face-off against the woke culture may result in a wreck or kicking wounds. However, Jerry Seinfeld refuses to be perturbed by the chaos his views have caused concerning politics and comedy. What an odd mix, you may imagine. Jerry Seinfeld, king of comedy and owner of the Seinfeld Comedy Show, has racked up a tornado chasing after him after a recent episode in his show caused by his statements on diversity in comedy, which was made worse by his unrelenting stance against political correctness, only managed to make it worse.
The controversy ignited during an interview where Seinfeld was questioned about the lack of diversity among the guests on his Netflix series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. The interview took place amid Seinfeld's return to the spotlight with a Super Bowl ad that reunited the cast of his legendary sitcom from the 80s and 90s. As he basked in the limelight of this reunion, the conversation veered toward his newer project, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee.
During that interview, Seinfeld was questioned regarding the glaring lack of diversity in the guests on his Netflix show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. The show involves Seinfeld introducing a vintage car selected for a guest comedian, and the two drive to a cafe or restaurant, including any other spontaneous detail previously scripted. This particular interview occurred around the period when the star had just returned with a Super Bowl ad that reunited his sitcom's cast from the 80s and 90s. What would have been a wonderful feeling for everyone soon turned one-sided when the conversation during the interview moved toward the Netflix show. Peter Lorre, BuzzFeed host who threw the question, confronted Seinfeld on the lack of diversity of his guests.
Jerry Seinfeld, the king of comedy, facing off against the woke culture brigade, and boy did sparks fly. But before we get into the juicy details, let me hit you with a couple of eye-popping facts. Did you know that Seinfeld, yes, the same guy behind the iconic sitcom, recently found himself at the center of a storm over diversity in comedy? And get this, his unapologetic stance against political correctness has caused chaos throughout Tinseltown. Jerry Seinfeld, beloved comedian and mastermind behind the iconic sitcom Seinfeld, found himself at the center of a heated debate when he made remarks regarding diversity in comedy. The controversy ignited during an interview where Seinfeld was questioned about the lack of diversity among the guests on his Netflix series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. The interview took place amid Seinfeld's return to the spotlight with a Super Bowl ad that reunited the cast of his legendary sitcom from the 80s and 90s. As he basked in the limelight of this reunion, the conversation veered toward his newer project, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee.
Oh, this really pisses me off, but go ahead. Really pisses me off. People think it's the census or something? I mean, this has got to represent the actual pie chart of America. Who cares? It's just funny, you know. Funny is the world that I live in.
During the interview, Seinfeld was confronted by BuzzFeed host Peter Lorre about the diversity of the comedians featured on his show. This unexpected curveball from Lorre led to a broader negative media storm surrounding Seinfeld's Netflix series. Critics seized upon the perceived lack of diversity among the guests, portraying Seinfeld as out of touch with the modern landscape of comedy. The media scrutiny intensified, painting Seinfeld as insensitive and resistant to change in an increasingly diverse and inclusive society. Seinfeld faced significant backlash from the media, with accusations of perpetuating a homogeneous view of comedy. So, what was the response?
This unexpected question from Lorre did not sit well and led to a host of negative media storms centered around the quite popular series Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. This was the exact opportunity critics had been waiting for, as they immediately began portraying Seinfeld as someone out of touch with the modern pattern of comedy. The backlash also portrayed him as insensitive and hardly progressive, stating that he seemed resistant to change despite the diverse and ever-changing society. According to critics, Seinfeld and his show portrayed a homogeneous, utterly archaic front of comedy. Anyone would crumble at these voices, especially with the constant comments on the lack of diversity in such an industry as comedy. But imagine how Seinfeld fights back,
perpetuating a homogeneous view of comedy. So, what was the response? In the face of mounting criticism over the lack of diversity in his comedy, Seinfeld maintained an unapologetic stance that reverberated throughout the entertainment industry. He adamantly asserted that comedy should transcend the boundaries of gender, race, and political agendas. He said that the essence of comedy lies in its ability to connect with audiences on a universal level, irrespective of societal constructs or ideologies. ideological leanings. For Seinfeld, the pursuit of genuine humor should not be shackled by the constraints of identity politics or virtue signaling. He championed the notion that laughter knows no bounds, and that the best comedy arises from a place of authenticity and relatability. Seinfeld's bold stance against the pressure to conform to political correctness resonated with many within the comedy community and beyond.
I have noticed that most of the guests are mostly white males of 22 episodes.
Yeah, let's get into that.
No, but you
take a look over here, Peter. What do you see? A lot of whiteys.
His refusal to compromise his comedic integrity in the face of societal expectations served as a rallying cry for those who shared his belief in the power of unfiltered humor. In a world increasingly fraught with divisiveness and ideological rigidity, Seinfeld's assertion that comedy should transcend societal divides serves as a beacon of hope for those who yearn for a return to a more lighthearted and inclusive form of entertainment. Comedy, like everything else, has been taking a bit of a roller coaster ride lately.
The king of comedy was unrelenting on his stand, surprising everyone throughout the entertainment industry. He maintained that the art of comedy must go beyond gender, race, and political standing, adding that there was more to it. Seinfeld also believed comedy was not fixed and passed through bounds, regardless of societal constructs or people's opinions. He feels genuine humor would be boxed and relegated if confined to certain ideas or identity politics. His reasons were centered on one thing: laughter had no boundaries and could be picked up from anywhere. Thus, comedy is usually relatable and authentic. It was not just his inability to conform, it also had to do with the loud stance on his reasons, which others within and outside the entertainment industry resonated with. To those who shared his points in comedy, it seemed as though they had finally found someone resilient enough to voice their opinions and stand by them. Judging from their support, it had been a long time coming. It seemed like hope returned to them who needed a return to actual humor and lightheartedness, not based on a text.
Ride lately. One of the big shifts we've seen is toward what some people call woke humor. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, it's all about being super aware of social issues and trying to tackle them head on in your jokes. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, comedy has always been a way for us to laugh at the things that make us uncomfortable. But here's where it gets tricky. Some people feel like this new wave of woke comedy can sometimes feel a bit forced or preachy. Enter comedians like Lily Singh and Hannah Gadsby. They've made a splash in the comedy world, but not everyone's on board with their style. Singh, for example, has a huge online following and is known for her energetic performances and socially conscious humor. However, some critics argue that her jokes can sometimes feel more like lectures than laughs. Then there's Gatsby, whose Netflix special Nanette got a lot of people talking. She takes on some heavy topics like trauma and identity, and while many found it refreshing, others felt like it was more of a TED Talk than a comedy show.
What a moment to witness the industry's infiltration with woke humor. And there is no clear distinction as to when that change began. Woke humor is treating social issues with humor. While this may not necessarily be bad, it helps lighten the problems. What exactly is comedy if we do not find humor in the things that are not funny? However, this new culture introduces a forced edge that may seem preachy. Of course, no shade to anyone in this line of comedy, like enter comedians such as Lily Singh and the Hannah Gadsby, who have managed to permeate the entertainment world but are yet to win the hearts of many with their style. We can argue that woke humor is likely to feel like a lecture, just as Singh's, who has a high following and performs with such admirable energy, is embedded with socially conscious humor. On the other hand, Gatsby is known to take up heavy topics like trauma and identity, and although it is quite refreshing to find humor in such issues, it seemed more like a TED Talk than a comedy show.
Now, don't get me wrong, it's awesome to see comedians tackling important issues, but for some of them, it's like they're missing the mark on what makes comedy, well, comedy. People want to hear jokes that make them snort laugh, not just nod their heads in agreement. So, what does all this mean for the future of comedy? Well, it's hard to say. Some people think this shift towards woke humor is just a passing trend, while others see it as the future of comedy.
The search for humor on topics of importance can make the comics miss the mark on comedy because people want humor to forget themselves and feel better. They want to laugh and snort, throw their heads back, and be joyous. People want to feel weightless for a few minutes or seconds, with every worry and every presence thrown aside and replaced with laughter. With this woke culture, however, the audience reacts with steady nods and smiles. The takes are very different, as some people agree that woke culture is the future of comedy, while others see it as a phase that will pass with time. The only thing that is for sure is that we all agree it is a current trend.
Right? This brings us to the critique of political correctness. You see, Seinfeld has been in the comedy game for a long time, and he's seen a lot of changes over the years. One thing that's really been bugging him lately is this idea of hypersensitivity towards humor. Seinfeld has observed that people these days seem to be walking on eggshells when it comes to comedy. They're afraid of offending someone or saying the wrong thing, and it's affecting the way comedians do their job. Now, Seinfeld isn't afraid to speak his mind, and he's had his fair share of experiences with audience reactions.
I mean, what does it feel like to you to make people laugh?
It's the best thing in the world. It's a couple of seconds of weightlessness, where everything in your mind, everything you think about and worry about and work on and your whole life is just gone for a second. And it lasts.
He's noticed that what used to be considered funny might not fly today. People are quick to take offense, and comedians are feeling the pressure to censor themselves. But here's the thing. Seinfeld believes that comedy should be a space where anything goes. It's supposed to push boundaries and challenge the status quo. But when you've got everyone tiptoeing around afraid to ruffle feathers, it takes the fun out of it. Seinfeld speaks from personal experience when he talks about the changing landscape of comedy. He's had jokes that used to fall flat because people are just too sensitive these days. And it's not just him, comics across the board are feeling the squeeze.
What was it about political correctness? Seinfeld, the king of comedy, has known every bit of the industry from all works and indications, as he witnessed several changes over time. From his observations, he inferred that what seemed to be funny before was not considered so anymore, and people had become somewhat uneasy with their jokes because they were too cautious and scared of offending anyone, which affected delivery. This practice is very much unlike the legendary comedian, who is unafraid of saying his mind. He also noticed that comedians have streamlined their jokes because people easily take offense. To him, all of this is a limiting factor, as anything should fly as a joke. So the limitations take the fun away, even for the comedians themselves. The legend admitted that even for him, there were moments when his jokes would fall flat due to people's high sensitivity. This view might have been readily dismissed if it were just Seinfeld, but comics have the same story. The audience is the determinant of the joke and is solely responsible for the outcome. Comedy is tricky because when a joke is told in a room full of people, while one half may roll to their sides in laughter, the rest may cringe and sigh. After all, we don't all have the same sense of humor. Although this may pose a problem, it is not so much a problem as certain people telling others what to consider funny and what not to.
Whether a joke lands with a bang or falls flat on its face. When Jerry Seinfeld takes the stage, he's not just there to make himself laugh. No, he's there to entertain the audience, to make them laugh until their sides hurt. Not everyone has the same sense of humor. What might have one person rolling in the aisles could leave another scratching their head, and that's what makes comedy so darn tricky. However, the problem arises when a specific group of people starts telling others what is funny and what is not, and what should be allowed in comedy and what not. Now, let's talk about Seinfeld's comedy and the diverse reactions it gets. Some people love his dry wit and observational humor. They appreciate his ability to find the funny in the mundane and relate to his quirky take on everyday life. But then others just don't get it. They find Seinfeld's humor too lame or his jokes too niche. And that's okay. Comedy is subjective after all. What tickles one person's funny bone might leave another person stone-faced. But here's the thing about Seinfeld. Love him or hate him, you can't deny his relevance in today's society. His brand of humor has stood the test of time, resonating with audiences across generations. And that's no small feat in an ever-changing world. With Jerry Seinfeld's critique of political correctness shaking things up, what does the future hold for the world of laughs? First off, let's talk about Seinfeld's influence. His refusal to bow down to the pressures of political correctness has sparked a much-needed conversation about the state of comedy, and that conversation isn't going away anytime soon. Some people think that Seinfeld's critique could pave the way for a resurgence of boundary-pushing comedy. You know, the kind of comedy that's not afraid to tackle taboo topics or push the envelope. After all, in a world where everyone's walking on eggshells, something is refreshing about a comedian who's...
For Seinfeld, some people love his humor and others do not. However, his agenda is to make himself laugh and entertain the audience with dry wit and the humor he finds in mundane things as he relates the jokes to everyday life. In all this, some people still do not get his jokes. They find them too basic, which is okay because comedy is subjective. Still, it is impossible to deny his strong presence in the comedy world, as his style of humor has waded through the years and generations. The fight and struggle to diversify comedy may not end soon, and so the lifespan of comedians in the industry may shorten. It is true that political correctness has its stand, but because of a threat to the introduction of limits, some believe Seinfeld's stand may be the pushback needed for a boundless and unrestricted comedy, instead of contradicting the views of someone who had weathered years and remained relevant until now. Everyone could listen. This is everything we have for this video. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, political correctness or not.